Sherrone Moore's Prove It year begins in the Citrus Bowl. I'll have more in a moment here on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
There's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
Hey, they said you can't be Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Merry Christmas to everybody. Welcome to the final episode of our calendar year 2025 here on Michigan Podcast. We will return in January. We're going to be joined next segment by a good friend of mine, former Michigan quarterback David Cohn over at Crane & Company on Daily Wire, and get more into specifics where Bryce Underwood is concerned, because his development is going to go a long way to determining whether or not we're making a coaching change 12 months from now here at the University of Michigan or not. And that's where I want to begin, because I think we are heading into a prove-it year with Sherrone Moore. Michigan's combined opponents that it faced in the Big Ten this year, 14-41. If last year Michigan had maybe the greatest 5-loss season in the history of college football, this year Michigan might have had the absolute most anemic 9-win season in the history of college football. So what does that mean moving forward? Well, you can grab a factoid for everything, any narrative that you want. If you want the narrative that Bryce did not improve as much, that the offense still can't score, its offensive numbers are way better than a year ago, but Sherrone teams still can't get to 21 points against ranked opponents, that narrative is there. If you want to say, hey, look at, we had 4 different players rush for 100 yards this year. Right. We had the youngest team in the Big Ten. At the end of the season, we're starting 6 players of freshman eligibility against Ohio State. And we essentially got virtually nothing from too much of our junior and senior classes because Jimmy just took 2 years off of recruiting. That's true, too. That's why, I don't think it was a great year, but I do think Sherrone Moore deserves another year to prove himself based on, number one, the role he played in rebooting our program after it looked like Jimmy's program had kind of tapped out. And then number 2, and maybe even more importantly, the way that he is recruiting thus far, including bringing in another class that doesn't have the depth maybe that you should have if you want a top 10 class, but at the top of it, guys with some real star power like Savion Hyder, Carter Meadows. Those are maybe the number 1 running back, number 1 edge prospect in the entire country, both coming into this incoming Michigan class. So that brings us into a prove-it year for Sherrone Moore. And I think that starts with this bowl game. Now, I'm going to have a take on this. Not surprisingly, a lot of you won't like it, all right? But I would much rather lose this game 38-28 But Bryce Underwood has clearly taken a step forward. He is in control of the offense. He is slinging it all over the field. And we just got into an up and down game against one of the best offensive minds in currently residing in college football in Steve Sarkisian. And, Wink Martindale demonstrated that he just wasn't up to the task in what could maybe be his final game as Michigan's DC. I do think we will have a different defensive coordinator next year, despite what Sherrone just said. But in the end, Arch Manning kind of went off. We lose 38-28 in a track meet. I don't know about you. I'd rather have that than we win 19-13 with some kind of grinded out game like the ReliaQuest Bowl. Because I think we need proof of concept. The transfer portal opens the next week after this bowl game. We've got to come out of this out of that transfer portal with an absolute A-list, clear, number one difference maker wide receiver to pair with Andrew Marsh. We have to. So I think we need proof of concept. I think, Bryce, the perception is Maryland aside, he seemed to regress as the year went on. I don't think that's correct, but I do think it's correct he did not take the step forward that was anticipated either. So I think we need some proof of concept. I think we need some branding momentum heading into a crucial portal that will likely decide Sherrone's fate and how next season goes against a way more difficult schedule. So I think it's better to lose 38-28 with a fully unleashed Bryce. And you're like, yeah, that looked different. That looked like New Mexico, but we weren't playing New Mexico. We were playing a real opponent. So I think we figured something out in these bowl games. Or then, hey, we dragged Texas into the mosh pit. We threw it 11 times with this 5-star quarterback. Arch Manning wasn't patient enough, threw a couple of picks, and we went 10-3 and finished 13th in the AP poll that no one will remember 5 minutes after it happens. So there's that. I think what game are we way more likely to remember and be excited about for the next 9 months until the next game? Because I kind of think it is, look at what Bryce Underwood did. But maybe I'm wrong. I'll find out what David Cohn has to think when we get to him in a few minutes. But I do think it's a prove-it year for Sherrone. This is a guy that has no previous head coaching experience, doesn't really have contract security, doesn't really have much of a buyout. And I also think moving forward, almost never should a Michigan football coach survive not making the playoffs 3 years in a row. I mean, the only reason I put the almost there is, a couple of those seasons where you like the last team in or the last team out, and they're trying to split hairs on whose team 12 or 15 or 16 if we expand this thing. I might have a little grace then, but almost never at Michigan should you be allowed to go 3 straight years and not make the playoffs. And I'd say the same thing on the basketball side. Almost never at Michigan should you be allowed to go 3 straight years and not make the NCAA tournament. So at the very least, given next year's schedule, and Sherrone's job just got tougher if you look at this coaching carousel now. 2 guys that I think Michigan would have heavily coveted a year from now if Sherrone had to be, run out of here. Well, they're coaching in our conference for other teams now. Pat Fitzgerald. Michigan people have loved Pat Fitzgerald for many years, tried to hire him to replace Lloyd Carr almost 20 years ago. And then Matt Campbell, who I know has coveted the Michigan job for quite a while. He just took the Penn State job. He's probably, by the fact he saw Iowa State, decide not to play in a bowl game, I think that's a clear sign he's going to raid that roster. So those of us who are laughing at, Penn State's lack of a recruiting class, congratulations. An Iowa State program that was maybe going to have the most returning production in the Big 12 next year. He's going to pretty much pilfer that roster, and that's the 2026 Penn State class, maybe even that quarterback, Rocco Becht. Well, they're on our schedule next year. We go to Oregon and Ohio State next year. We have Oklahoma in the non-conference next year. This job just got a lot harder. If you looked at the roster of coaches in the Big Ten and just put them up for bid, how far down the list would we get before someone decided, hey, I want Sherrone Moore to be my coach? So it is absolutely a prove-it year for Sherrone Moore. I want him to prove it. I'm getting too old to wait for next year. I'm in my 50s now, right? So I would love to prove it, and then we're all just moving on, and we've got momentum. But he has to do that, and that starts with this Citrus Bowl and what happens and what do we see with Bryce Underwood's development in that game. Hey, Steve Deace here with a word for our Patreon supporters and those of you that are considering it. We are reconfiguring our Patreon page for two reasons. One, doing this since 2017, I've just developed a lot of good relationships and sources, and that's given me an opportunity to maybe hear some things, learn some things that maybe I think are going to happen, but I'm not quite ready to put out there for the general public yet. And we're going to start posting a lot of that kind of content on our page now at Michigan Podcast on patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And then reason number two is just to be blunt, guys, with legalization, the betting lines in these various sports are more difficult and tighter and bet into than ever before. And I just think there's way more money to be made where there's higher variance in future. So I'm going to be devoting way more of my time, where historically my track record on those kinds of things is very good anyway. So I'm going to be devoting way more of my time on those things seasonally than trying to keep up with all the various line moves happening in things like college basketball, where we just weren't off to that great of a start this year anyway. So you're going to get more content and less betting advice on the Patreon page. But we appreciate all of you guys for supporting us. You guys have been great in making sure that we can continue to exist here at Michigan Podcast. So if you want to support us, all right, we're still going to give you some best bets on win totals and other things, our bracket tips that work out so well every year. You're still going to get all that, but even more content here at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Again, that's patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. All right, back here on Michigan Podcast, and we're going to break from our normal routine because I've got a good friend of mine, a lot of you know, former Michigan quarterback David Cohn, with us from Crane & Company over at Daily Wire. Because, as I just said during the opening of the show, the number one thing that Sherrone's got to address in order to pass the test for this upcoming Prove It year is we have to develop Bryce Underwood. So let me go to a guy who's actually played the position. So good to see you, my friend. Merry Christmas to you. How are you?
Steve Deace, thank you so much for having me. Merry Christmas to you as well. I'm excited to be here, buddy.
Hey, let's start with, before we get specific about Bryce, let me start with a couple meta things I addressed in the open and tell me if you agree or disagree. Number one, the upcoming Citrus Bowl against Texas. I think it's way more important than winning this game 16-13 or 19-13 like we beat Alabama last year in the ReliaQuest. I think it's way more important. I'd rather lose this game 38-28. But Bryce throws for 300 yards, and our defense just, Arch Manning goes nuts. I can live with that, but it's clear Bryce Underwood, with 15 bowl practices, has taken a definitive step forward. Then we win some kind of grinded out game, finish 10-3, and we're like 13th in the final AP poll or something. I don't know what kind of momentum that establishes for next year. Heading into the portal the very next week, we've got to come out of this with at least one of the top 5 top 10 minimum receiver prospects. And I think we need a proof of concept more than we need a win. David, what do you think?
You're hitting on something very important there when you talk about what bowl games have become now. And we're talking about it a lot on Crane & Company. The entire college football world is talking about it. Where is the bowl game that you play, is that the conclusion to this current season? Or is that more like a preseason game to the next year? Regardless of how you view that, at least we're going and playing the game. And I'm not trying to take any unnecessary shots at Notre Dame right here this second, just 48 hours after they have declined an opportunity to go play a bowl game themselves. But what I will say is, in an era where you see more and more of these teams saying, no, we don't want to go play a bowl game, someone could get hurt. And then I'm watching Kirby Smart at a podium, and I'm watching Eli Drinkowitz, and I'm watching Clark Lee, and these guys say, yeah, this is football. You can get hurt walking to your car. We're going to use this as an opportunity to go compete. I just don't want these young men to lose sight of the fact that every time you're invited to play a football game is an opportunity to go compete and to go get better. And I say this as someone who's 37 right now, and I'll never play organized football again. The opportunity to go suit them up and put the pads on just one more time is something that I would give anything for. And so some of those seniors in South Bend now have played their last football game, right, wrong, or indifferent to the college football playoff. So at least we're going to go face Texas, two of the greatest brands in the history of this sport. I can't wait for it. I like Texas in the football game. Obviously, a large part of that depends on exactly what you said. Are we going to be playing to win the game, or are we going to be playing to set ourselves up for 2026? To me, it's an opportunity to go compete, regardless if you're playing younger guys, regardless if you're framing the schematics and the scheme in order to develop Bryce Underwood and let him try and throw the football 50 times. Again, also, Steve, it's never a bad thing for a young guy to do whatever it takes in that game to win it. Right? So you laid out a couple different score scenarios there. It's also good to just put yourself in game pressure against Steve Sarkisian, a coach who's made the college football playoff each of the last 2 years and a proud football program in Texas, where if Bryce needs to throw it 12 times and he needs to utilize his legs because they're playing two high safeties and they're giving up a lot in the run game, then make the correct call throughout the game and go win the football game. So I could see this going a number of different ways. I'm proud that we're going and we're going to compete against them.
What would be better, just as a follow-up there, what's better for next year? We lose 38-28, but Bryce throws for 300 yards and takes a clear step forward as a passer, or we win 19-13 like we did the ReliaQuest Bowl last year. What's better for the program heading into 26, do you think?
It's better if we win the football game and we beat Texas. Now, again, Bryce Underwood going out and throwing for 300 yards just to do it, and possibly like recruiting a wide receiver who maybe otherwise was just on the fence, I guess. Like you could frame a hypothetical to where that happens. But you know what's a lot cooler? And you know what's a lot cooler to 18 to 22-year-olds? Winning football games and beating a team that was a preseason number one, and Bryce hadn't thrown for 300 yards in any game this year. If that was your only goal, just to go out and have Bryce throw for 300 yards, we could have done that. He could have done that against Central Michigan. He could have done that against New Mexico. If that was the only goal, I think it's better to go out there and beat Texas as bad as you can.
Second meta question before we get into specifics about developing Bryce. I think it's just kind of become accepted conventional wisdom. I mean, you're more connected to the Former Player Network than I am as one of them, but just former players I follow, whose podcast I listen to, and I listen to what they think outside of the analytical community that I reside in and partake of from a content perspective, because you guys just know more ball. But it kind of feels like this is the prove it year for Sherrone Moore coming up in 2026. I mean, I listened to Jake Butt and Devin Gardner's podcast. I mean, those two guys now have national gigs like you. I mean, Jake Butt's openly saying it's a prove it year on their podcast. Devin Gardner's even naming Sherrone's successor, Joe Brady, the Buffalo Bills OC, who was Joe Burrow's OC at LSU. But a lot of the stuff in people I follow, it basically, if it's not playoff or bust, it kind of feels like you've at least got to be one of those teams on the screen that got passed over or bust, kind of a thing, right? Because next year's schedule is friggin' treacherous.
Yeah.
All right. So 8-4 next year is definitely not going to cut it. 9-3, depending on if we have some marquee wins, unlike this year, might cut it. But it definitely feels to me like it is a prove it year for Sherrone Moore next year. What do you think of that?
I do agree with that, and that's how it should be. You're the head coach at the University of Michigan. I do want to correct one little point there, just because Joe Brady's name came up so much with LSU opening this year, and like you said, he did such a great job in 2019, was not the offensive coordinator, though. Steven Insminger was.
Right.
But look, I don't want to take anything away from whatever play calling and designing he was doing in the pass game for Joe Burrow. And again, it's Joe Burrow throwing to Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, right? So,
hard to suck.
At the same time, Josh Allen also at the NFL level, when he struggled with interceptions. Look what Joe Brady has gotten him to do this year. So his name is going to come up. I don't know if it made a lot more sense with LSU opening up than it does with the University of Michigan. I just wanted to point that out while we were talking about him. Yes, it has to be a prove it year, because you had one of the greatest football coaches in the history of the game, really, in Jim Harbaugh. And I say that because of the success that he's had at both levels, not just here with the last 3-year stint that he had at Michigan, making 3 college football playoffs in a row, winning 3 Big Ten titles, going undefeated, winning a national championship. But look at what he's also done at the NFL level. I mean, I think you could probably name guys on one hand who've coached in a national championship at the college level and also in the Super Bowl. And hey, he's now positioning himself to possibly be one of even a shorter list.
Pete Carroll, Barry Switzer, and Jimmy Johnson. That's your list.
Exactly.
And Jim Harbaugh.
Exactly. And he's positioned to be one who wins at the college level and then wins a Super Bowl. He still has that opportunity because he's the head coach of a really good football team. Obviously, in the Harb Bowl there, he lost to his brother a decade ago. But anyway, you had one of the greatest coaches to ever coach the game. at the University of Michigan, and that's hard to follow up. I understand that. But look what Ward Manuel has done with the basketball program. And I keep thinking of this. I know it's early on here in 2025. I know that, we don't have a large sample size, but this Michigan basketball program so far under Dusty May, after we moved on from Juwan Howard, clearly is headed in the right direction. They're playing championship basketball. And so I was a big advocate for Sherrone Moore taking the job, mostly because of the way the calendar worked out post Jim Harbaugh. Remember, he coached in the last game of the season to win a national championship, then left a week later, right? And then you lose your starting quarterback who possibly could have come back for a senior year, but most likely wasn't because he's a top 10 pick. All that has happened after you've already had every coach land where they were going to land. Elevating Sherrone Moore, who already filled in for half your games because you were suspended, made a lot of sense in terms of team cohesion and not having a mass exodus in the transfer portal. Someone like Colin Cowherd advocated differently. He said, no, that doesn't matter. Who cares if players leave? Go out and get the best coach you possibly can right now, even if it's late. I think whether or not he was right or whether or not I was right is kind of going to be determined by how Sherrone Moore puts up here in 2026.
Good stuff. All right, let's talk about Bryce specifically. There is what I would call an urban legend amongst our fans that, and I understand where it comes from. A lot of fan tropes are dumb. But every now and then, there's a basis for it, right? I mean, we clearly saw a more freewheeling, Bryce Underwood in the 3 games that had the interim coach, all right, that Biff coached, compared to the 9-game composite that Sherrone coached, all right? Now, I would argue, those 3 games were against Central Michigan, who's just at a different talent level. They had a nice season in the MAC, but had maybe no guys who would start for us. And Nebraska just fired its defensive coordinator and had a terrible defense last year, right? So it's much easier to be wheeling and dealing against those guys than against this Oklahoma team that its defense just carried it to a playoff home game, for example. And what I think is actually true, and I saw this myself just watching tape, rewatching games. And then I wait for guys, again, I listen to shows like you and Devin, Jake, Doug Skeen, those guys who see the all 22 and actually know what they're looking at to see if, my layman, I just know enough to be dangerous, instincts are correct. And I think it's a great misnomer that Sherrone has been putting his thumb on the offense and reining Bryce in. I think the opposite is true. If you look at the game plans against Michigan State, against Purdue, in this game against Ohio State, or the last game against Ohio State, the opposite was true. It was very clear that they intended to throw the ball more. It was very clear, particularly against Michigan State and Purdue, that the intent was to put the game into Bryce's hands. And hey, there are games, we just watched Ty Simpson just blink, right, against Georgia. I remember watching a senior Chad Henne, your old teammate. Yes, I know he was banged up, okay? But I watched a senior Chad Henne blink in his final home game against Ohio State. Even great quarterbacks will blink. Pat Mahomes blinked last year in the Super Bowl, maybe the greatest of all time, okay? But I thought it was clear that they wanted the game plan to run through Bryce. And he demonstrated early on he's not seeing it, or he can't do it. He's not feeling it. It's not there yet. He can't do it yet. He can't execute it yet. And then I think this gets back to the open, why I asked the opening question to you, I did to set this up. Because I think the great tension that's existed all of this season is we do have an uncertain head coach with no real buyout, no long-term, security whatsoever, and he's never been a head coach before. And let's just be honest, if he was on an open market right now, how many teams in the Big Ten would hire Sherrone Moore? 2? 3? Maybe. Yeah. Okay. And so he knows this too. He's not a dummy. He knows this. So he's got to win games. Right? And so I think they really did want Bryce to sling it. I think they did want a proof of concept. It was clear Bryce was not ready for that. In hindsight, probably if he had stayed healthy, we should have started with Mikey Keene as the Cade McNamara type and brought Bryce along slowly. We didn't have that option because Mikey was hurt. And so now he's like, well, that's great. We're going to go 6-6, but hey, we developed Bryce and then my ass is fired. I'm 6-6 at Michigan in year 2. And so I think they did want to run this offense through Bryce. You can see it with the stuff they were running early in these games, what they were running to then set up other things. and he just could not execute it consistently. And at that point, I think that is in the game now where Sherrone probably stepped in and said, now listen, we have to win this game. I don't care how ugly it is. I need W's, right? And I'm not going to get an extension because Bryce threw for 3,000 yards. I'm going to get an extension because we went 9-3, right? And so I think that tension kind of existed all year, that they did several times try to run this offense through Bryce. They did several times try to make this a more quarterback-centric offense than what Michigan fans are used to seeing, but he wasn't able yet to execute it. And it's in the games then where the reins were pulled back and the coach just said, listen, we just got to go win the damn game. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, you're hitting on some very important points there, and I'm tracking along with you. I want to hit on some things here, and I'm going to try and go in a specific order. The first thing I want to say is that Bryce Underwood is 18 years old, and I need people out there to understand that. He's an 18-year-old true freshman, and the difference between a true freshman and a redshirt freshman is seismic. He just showed up to campus. Julian Sand's been on campus for over a year. Arch Manning finally took over as the starting quarterback for Texas. This is his third year on campus. Now, we can get into why an 18-year-old quarterback was having to start at the University of Michigan. I don't think that should ever be the case. Obviously, my senior year, it ended up having to be the case because Rich Rodriguez came in and ran a completely different offense, and that pretty much eliminated the fact that I was ever going to be a starting quarterback there at Michigan. That's just the reality of the situation. You mentioned Chad Henne, a longtime teammate of mine, the best quarterback that I ever played with in person. He ended up having to start as a true freshman because Matt Gutierrez got injured before the season started. Chad Henne ended up throwing for the most yards and the most touchdowns his freshman year. But what did he eliminate and reduce as his career went on? Interceptions. That's something that I want to talk about. I also want to mention that I don't want to completely absolve Bryce Underwood just for being a young guy, because we've seen true freshmen win at the highest level. Trevor Lawrence is a great example of someone who Kelly Bryant first started that season. So that goes to your analogy of having a quarterback who starts those first couple games until it becomes undeniable that the young freshman is clearly better and you have to hand over the reins. Trevor Lawrence goes 15-0, wins the national title, throws for over 3,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. It's just absolutely unheard of, right? Jalen Hurts is another example that I think is a good comp there at Alabama. Threw for 2,700 yards, but added another almost 1,000 yards on the ground en route to leading an Alabama team to a national title. And so when you look at the University of Michigan post Jim Harbaugh, you have to say, what was our roster management? What was going on with our roster management where we didn't have a plan post J.J. McCarthy? And again, he was a top 10 pick, so you can't just say you were surprised that he left for the NFL after his junior year, his junior season. There clearly was no plan last year. Michigan suffered because of it, still found a way to go 8-5 and beat the Buckeyes and beat Alabama while throwing for 60 yards. But hey, we've solved that because we're going to bring in a transfer quarterback, and we recruited the highest ranked recruit in the history of the program. Well, how's that going to play out? And we asked Sherrone Moore in the offseason. He came on our show, Crane & Company, and I said, hey, at least tell us how you're going to evaluate the quarterbacks and decide who it's going to be that starts, because I know it's not going to be based off who you paid the most NIL money to. You're going to play the best guy. How are you going to determine who that is? And that's exactly what he said. And he said, we're going to have a spring camp, we're going to have summer camp, we're going to have fall camp, and we're going to decide. Well, Mikey Keene's injury sort of took his name out of the running. You end up having to start a true freshman quarterback in Bryce Underwood, who probably was going to be the starter anyway, because even as a true freshman, as an 18-year-old kid, you can't deny the skill set. And I just want to make sure people understand out there that even at 18, he accomplished more than I did in my entire Michigan career. It's hard enough to even go get a snap cleanly on the road at Oklahoma against that defense and Brent Venables. Forget being a difference maker and winning the game for your team. It's hard enough to go get a single snap cleanly. That Buckeyes defense that he just faced, again, like they are the top premier defenses in the country for a reason. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that is clarified and that's out of the way first. Now, on this issue about who, if Sherrone Moore as the head coach is micromanaging the offense, I tend to agree with you. There is this narrative going around with Michigan football that as long as the offense would call more passing plays, we would have beaten Oklahoma on the road and we would have beaten the Buckeyes at home. What are you talking about? I mean, it gets worse when you watch the all 22 wide view, but even on the television cameras, you can see wide receivers are getting open against the Buckeyes.
I saw more receivers open on our team this year than I frankly have I don't know, since we had Nico Collins and Donovan Peoples-Jones. There's more wide receivers open this year than there were the 3 years we won the Big Ten championship in a row.
Go watch Donovan McCulley and Andrew Marsh against the Buckeyes. They are getting open. They are getting separation against one of the best defenses in the country. If Bryce Underwood is on time, he's hitting that, and we are going to pick them apart and can move down the field. And again, my biggest thing prior to that game was how are we going to utilize the RPO scheme? Because Bryce had been getting better and better at the run-pass option throughout the year, but at the same time, Matt Patricia and that Ohio State defense has been so good about if you just make a mistake one time, we're going to capitalize. So how much were we going to use the RPO versus pre-called runs versus pre-called passes? So that was one thing coming in that I was a little bit not worried about, but I was curious about. But there are wide receivers open in that game that if we're just on time at the quarterback position, we can hit that and we can sustain long drives. This idea that the offense is getting if we just call more pass plays that somehow Bryce Underwood would have had a breakout season, I don't agree with that. I do want to say this though, because I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I've watched a Chip Lindsey offense with a quarterback in Drake May. Granted, again, he was a senior. Bryce Underwood is going to be so much better 2 years from now. He's going to be so much better 2 months from now, right? But I've seen an offense with Drake May at North Carolina that did throw for 3,600 yards and over 30 touchdowns, right? So I know what Chip Lindsey's offense is capable of. Meanwhile, I've seen Sherrone Moore when he was an interim coach against Penn State with J.J. McCarthy, who was a top 10 pick, not throw the football once in the second half. Right in the aftermath of that, we all laughed, right? Because we won the game. Oh, man, we didn't even throw a pass in the second half. We can run it on Penn State. Well, it's all fun and games, but after a while, you look back and say, well, why didn't we? You know, it clearly wasn't because we had quarterback deficiencies like we did a year ago. There's something with Sherrone Moore as a former offensive lineman who wants to run the football and who wants to bully you. So which one of those two is the right answer? It's got to be a combination of the two. You have to be able to utilize the skill sets of the players that you have without completely abandoning your offensive philosophy. I think Georgia, the Georgia Bulldogs, is a great football team to look to. Not just Georgia this year with Gunnar Stockton and the way that they've run the football. And look, you could see it in the SEC championship game this past weekend. But look at the Georgia team that went back-to-back. They ran the football well, but they're not back-to-back national champs without Stetson Bennett and his ability to deliver the football through the air downfield. And Jim Harbaugh, honestly, I think did a great job of this. Having an offensive philosophy where you are going to impose your physicality on defenses, that's your bread and butter, but at the same time, you have athletic playmakers who can make plays for you, as opposed to, say, just turning into 2019 LSU for one season. As great as that was, as awesome as it was to watch Joe Burrow just throw bombs over Baghdad to Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, that to me is not the type of offensive identity that Michigan should have or even try and go for one season, right? We know what their identity is, and I think they can still be explosive within their identity.
You mentioned Arch Manning, Julian Sang. So those are the last two consensus number one quarterback recruits, and then Bryce was last year. Okay. Arch Manning was on campus 30 months before he got his first start and really did not. I mean, he looked like the most overhyped recruit of all time until about the end of October of this season. Julian Sayin, you go back and watch that Texas game. I mean, they had training wheels on him that entire game. Ryan Day did not want to put the game in his hands. And steadily more and more and more as the season has gone on, they have done more and more of that. But then you also saw against Indiana, all of a sudden now this young man's getting hit more in this game than he had all season long combined. And now he just looks like a redshirt freshman quarterback, right? And so since that's the context here, Bryce was on campus or was in the program for 15 bowl practices in Tampa and in Ann Arbor last December. He was there all winter conditioning. He was there all spring practice. So he's getting the number one reps because there's no Mikey Keene, right? He's there throughout all of 7-on-7 and summer conditioning. He's getting all those number one reps again for another 15 practices in the fall leading up to the game. All the number one practices number one reps during practice throughout the game weeks throughout the year too. With that said, did he demonstrate the level of development that he should have given that amount of time on task? I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. And secondly, there's been a lot of talk that we need a quarterbacks coach. I've been told Sherrone was very hesitant about bringing one in last year. But now he just said in his press conference yesterday, he's thinking about it. Would you bring in the guy who, the quarterback coach there, the local guru that has quarterback coached Bryce since he was in junior high? Or would you be like, that guy might be too close to him and I need a more objective voice? What do you think on all of that I just laid out there?
This is a second narrative that I wanted to hit on, so I'm glad you brought it up, this idea that, we need to get a quarterback coach in there to coach up Bryce Underwood. And I immediately started scratching my head, like, is that not what's happening? Like, how do we not already have a coach? And again, maybe I shouldn't just assume anymore. In 2025, Steve, maybe I should just stop assuming, because when I was at the University of Michigan, Scott Loeffler was my quarterback coach. Now, he was a co-OC. He called the passing plays. Mike DeBoer called the running plays. But, I mean, this guy, I spent every waking moment with this guy, right? I mean, like, I couldn't do anything without making sure he was in the back of my head, even on my way to class, telling me what my progression should be if it's zone versus man on speed break Detroit, right side 300 box, Y stick H through a 54X slush. Like that, like this stuff is just getting dialed in at every moment. So the fact that I guess what I'm trying to say, I don't believe that there's not a quarterback coach in there, and Chip Lindsey technically is coaching the quarterbacks, who is not walking through these progressions with Bryce every single day. Now, do you need a completely separate quarterbacks coach for mechanics as opposed to what Chip Lindsey is doing with scheme and offensive philosophy? I mean, look, I say, like, whatever Bryce feels comfortable with, whatever he thinks could help him. At the same time, you can add too much, right? Like, you can just overthink things. But they've got to make that decision. Like, is there enough coaching in that room, or are we just trying to come up with some excuses because an 18-year-old kid wasn't hitting wide open receivers against one of the best defenses in the country? Again, if it were just based off athletic talent, Bryce Underwood clearly showed a lot as an 18-year-old true freshman, and I think he would be better next year. But based off the people that I've talked to who are close with him, Connor Stallions being one, this kid brings so much more than just physical athletic talent to the table. It sounds like he's in the film room all the time studying. It sounds like he wants to be better every minute of the day. If that's true, if that's his mindset to be better combined with his athletic ability, then yes, 12 months from now, we're going to be seeing a completely different Bryce Underwood who has developed, just like what we were just saying with Julian saying. And look, I mean, like you said, Arch Manning had over 30 months before he had to take over the starting role, and he struggled mightily this year. He had a whole different issue going on with his last name in terms of preseason hype and all those things. But at the same time, you didn't bring in Bryce Underwood. You didn't pay the amount of money that you did for Bryce Underwood for him to throw 9 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. Again, I don't want to completely absolve him of the way that he was making plays this year, because we have seen other true freshmen. If you're going to start a true freshman at the University of Michigan, then you need to be much more in the Trevor Lawrence, Chad Henne, Jalen Hurts variety than what we saw this year. Now, they did go 9-3, okay, but like we've discussed before, Steve, that was against one of the I don't want to say easier, but more manageable schedules that I've seen for Michigan in a while. I don't think it's going to get much easier than that.
Yeah, our combined Big Ten opponents were 14-41, David. It was very easy. It was easy as you can get in an 18-team league anyway.
Yeah.
All right, final thing. Okay. I've had more than one college football coach tell me over the course of my career, the most a player will improve is those 15 bowl practices. At most, a young player will improve is those 15 bowl practices. It's the first time that the coaches, for guys who are redshirting, it's the first real coaching they've gotten since fall camp, since so much time is spent getting, the guys who are going to play ready for game week. And then for the young guys that did play a lot, it's the first time that they've had a chance to really go back and correct kind of the meta fundamental things that you just don't have time to continually address again when you're prepping for a game and kind of get them, reconstructed and back on the narrow path, so to speak. So with that in mind, and I would, if Bryce Underwood called you, I know you wouldn't necessarily just give him advice because you're not there. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what's being told behind the scenes. You don't know that kind of stuff, right? But if he were to call you, what questions would you ask before this bowl game that would then, when you got out to the bowl game, kind of give you an idea of whether or not these 15 practices prepared him to take the next step in 2026?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. And look, some advice is universal, but the first thing that I would ask him is what's keeping you up at night, right? Like what really bothers you from defensive schemes? Is it pre-snap? Is it post-snap? Is it a combination of the two? And then from there, he could get in. His answers from there would tell me how much of the RPO game is what's keeping him up at night, how much he's having to read post-snap. Again, there was a point in this season where Ty Simpson, Alabama's quarterback, threw 20 touchdowns and 1 interception. Now he faced Oklahoma's defense. He had to face Georgia's defense a second time. And now all of a sudden he's turned the football over a little bit more because I think the book is a little bit out on how you can get to Ty Simpson from a pre-snap look to a post-snap look. And again, it takes a very special defense to be able to pull that off. Any guy can go in and scheme up all sorts of stuff, but if you don't have the players who can execute it the way Georgia does, the way the Buckeyes do, then it's all for naught. So what's keeping you up at night, and how can we help him better see his pre-snap recognition into his post-snap recognition? When you watch Bryce Underwood throw the football or you watch Arch Manning throw the football, there's no throw these guys can't make. They can make every throw in the book, arm strength, accuracy, and they both have a secret weapon, their mobility, right? So what's the only thing keeping them from being the best player in the country? It's how are you processing what the defense is giving you? And I think Bryce Underwood's going to look back at 2025 and be thankful that he got to go play two of the best defenses in the country, one as his first road start in the country, and both those teams are in the college football playoff. And if I was coaching Bryce Underwood right now, and maybe they're already doing it, but again, I don't want to assume anything. We did this when I was at Michigan with Scott Loeffler. I would just go out on air, no defense, no offensive linemen, and I would recreate every passing play from those games against Oklahoma, against the Buckeyes, really do it for as many games or as many of the plays where you were confused from pre-snap into post-snap as possible, and just throw the right route on time on air. I don't even care if it's 3/4 speed. Just let him go see, this is the throw that I should have made, and it should have been on this timing. Just let him go do it. Let him go do it and build into the bowl season and then into 2026. As far as your analogy on how you can improve from bowl season and all that, if you're talking about a 5th-year senior to a 6-7-year player, which now anybody can play as long as they want, there's only so much better you're going to get, right? Like even like now I can see the game a lot better now that I'm older, but physically I wouldn't be able to make nearly the throws that I'd be able to make when I was 20 or 21. But again, for Bryce, because we're talking about an 18-year-old kid who probably in a better situation wouldn't have even seen the field unless it were mop-up time this past year or some sort of Tim Tebow compliment to Chris Leak a la 2006 Florida Urban Meyer. Like that's the scenario I think would have been best for Bryce Underwood. Instead, he had to be the primary signal caller the entire season. His development into bowl season and into 2026, because he's so young, I do think could be exponential.
Excellent stuff, my friend. Sounds like you believe in the axiom that you want young quarterbacks to have a pre-snap read and experienced quarterbacks not to need one. Sounds like you kind of agree with that axiom a little bit, right?
I heard a funny story recently where Phillip Rivers, towards the end of his playing career, which I just saw,
calling the defense for the opponents and when they misaligned.
Exactly. Which I saw Phillip
you're
Rivers,
misaligned. Yeah.
He pointed across to the Mike linebacker and said, based off the blitz you're bringing, you're misaligned.
Yes. Yeah,
I mean, you want to talk about knowing football or knowing football. This is why Tom Brady had the level of success that he did. At this point right now, Bryce Underwood can make more throws right now than Tom Brady can. Okay, but Tom Brady could go out there and make every single throw against that Buckeyes defense still, because he knows what they're going to do before they do it. That's what makes this game so special. That's what makes it so cool. It's a very simple game. I want to take this football and get it over that line, and you try and stop me. But everything that's involved with that through the schematics and the tactics gets very complicated, and we just got to slow it down for a young kid and help him grow.
Great stuff, brother. Merry Christmas to you. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Merry Christmas to you, Steve. Thank you.
You bet. This week's X poll results 2 years in. What best describes your belief in Sherrone Moore? Only 4% of you said he's the guy. Wow. 58% of you agree with me. One more year to prove it. 38% of you said you are already out after 2 years. That brings us to our feedback of the week from David C. Shaw. He writes, I believe reluctantly that Sherrone needs one more year. Recruiting has been back to the pre-22 and 23 years. I agree. That being said, significant staff changes need to happen, and the portal has to be the focal point, unlike the last 2 years. Many positions are in need, and a quarterback coach for Bryce is a must. Playoff or he's fired. I know a lot of you feel that way. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode. And this year, the calendar year's episodes of Michigan Podcast. Again, we'll be back in January after the holidays. In the meantime, don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, comment right here on YouTube or iTunes. All those things help us to grow and to find more Michigan fans just like you. Thanks, guys. I mean, our episode views this year are an all-time high. So appreciate each and every one of you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of you. Don't forget to follow us in between episodes as well at Michigan Podcast on X. Re-mention what I said earlier. We're reconfiguring our Patreon page, and so you're going to get a lot more content there, team and sport related as well, at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast there too for supporters. Again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to all of you. I'm Steve Deace. Go Blue.